people could just mute themselves. They can unmute to ask questions. Just know the Tuesday
Just want to
morning.
say good morning, Pauline. Good morning.
Good morning. The Tuesday morning group, which started under Rabbi Neil, I believe, has been studying things as they read through the Tanakh. We've done some other things, and then we read a book called Learning from the Germans about how the German confrontation with their Nazi past could perhaps give us lessons as Americans, particularly in the South, and with racism and the legacy of racism and disguised neo-racism and neo-slavery. And then, of course, I remember Jeremy's in Berlin, and he's going to talk about what it's like to live as a Jew in Berlin.
Easy.
Amazing. Thank you, Nylene. I'll also
Excuse me,
say,
Nylene, despite your request that people mute, some people haven't muted, and there's a lot of feedback I'm hearing from certain sites. So please, people, thank you. Sorry, Jeremy.
no problem. So first off, I'll say it's really a pleasure to be speaking with you all. To see so many familiar faces. It's been a long time. I was younger the last time I saw all of you. We were all younger, I suppose, except for Jerry. Jerry's aging backwards, but the rest of us. So it's really a pleasure, and I will just tell you a little bit about, I'll spend a little bit of time telling you about Jewish life in Berlin, and then I'll open it up to your questions, because I'm sure your questions will also help to better guide the conversation. So my wife and I, we first came to Berlin about 4 years ago, and we came for a month because I won a fellowship that sort of allowed me to do anything I wanted, and I feel very tied to Jewish Europe. I lived in Warsaw when I was still in university, and then I moved to Ukraine, and I was in Ukraine almost 4 years. And then after that, I worked for Moshe House as the director of the European Director of Jewish Education. And I got to travel all around Europe and actually even the world teaching Torah, which was really amazing. And I feel very tied to Jewish Europe, and Rebecca, my wife, also does. And we wanted to do something in Europe, and we kind of randomly chose Berlin because Berlin was actually, we had heard Berlin was the fastest growing Jewish community in Europe. Maybe it's the only growing Jewish community in Europe. That's along with Budapest. It's probably just the two of them. And also Paris, but that's a separate conversation. But we were interested, and we also wanted, I speak Russian, we wanted a place where my Russian would be useful. And so we just showed up in Berlin, not knowing really anybody. We connected with this couple beforehand, Deckel and Nina Peretz, who were trying to revive this synagogue in an area of Berlin that had it had become a really poor and immigrant area. A lot of Turkish immigrants moved in. And then over time, it had started gentrifying. A bunch of young Israelis were moving in, a bunch of young Jews, and they started sort of reviving this synagogue. And so we connected with them. We had a great conversation. We're like, okay, great. We'll go to Berlin for a month. And the response was overwhelming. I mean, we showed up and we rented an apartment and we threw a party and 30 people showed up, only one of whom we had ever met before in our lives. And for us, that was kind of a sign like, wow, there's a real thirst for something here. And so we had a crazy month and we decided, okay, let's come back for a second summer. And we came back for a second summer and we had even more people. I think in 2 months, we connected with almost 300 unique people, like different people. Also, they were unique. And it showed us that there was a real thirst and a real desire and a real necessity because Jewish life in Berlin is on the rise. It's a very young city. And with that, it's a very young Jewish community. So the Jewish community is, in Germany as a whole, something about 85 to 90% of the Jews come from the former Soviet Union. In the 90s and early 2000s, Germany offered citizenship to any Jews from the former Soviet Union. Not necessarily citizenship, but residency. And a lot of Jews moved there, especially because they offered better social services than Israel. So if you weren't feeling particularly Zionistic, or if you had tried to make Aliyah but it didn't work, Germany was a good option because they offered you lots of money for moving. They offered you free language classes. They offered you all this integration stuff. You know, Israel's a little bit like, okay, you know, welcome, good luck. And like sending you on your way, like, yeah, come for Shabbos, good luck figuring out how you make the money. And Germany is a lot more caretaker when it comes to that kind of stuff. So a lot of Jews came here. So in the country, it's about 85 to 90%. In Berlin, it's probably closer to 50 or 60%, because Berlin has anywhere between 25 to 130,000 Jews, depending on who you ask. I think there's probably about 50,000 Jews in Berlin. So probably 60% of those are from the former Soviet Union. You probably have about 15 to 20%, whereas you probably have about 10 to 15,000 Israelis in Berlin, depending on how you count. Some people say as many as 20. I don't think it's quite that high, but you have a lot of Israelis living here. You have the old German Jewish community, the old Berlin Jewish community, which probably there's a couple thousand of those. You have a very high percentage of, there's a lot of converts in the community, German converts, some of whom have varying degrees of complicated past, which I can get into if people are interested. And then you also have like a smattering of expats from all over. Berlin is a young, exciting city. You have a lot of South Americans whose grandparents were German, who from Brazil and Argentina especially, who are moving to Berlin because like there's not great economic prospects for a young, smart entrepreneurial type in Sao Paulo. So he has a German passport, so he comes to Berlin. I actually just I was just walking with someone this morning, which we're allowed to do here, just in case there are any questions. Who grew up in Sao Paulo, and he has a German passport, so he moved to Berlin. So that's a little bit about the community in general. And then we moved here full-time a year ago. Our project is called Base Berlin. I'm sitting in Base Berlin right now. It's also our home. And we are the arm of Hillel International in Germany. And we deal with students, but we also deal with young people in general. And I will say we have a 50 to 60-year-old group who also comes to a lot of our events because there aren't a lot of places for those people to go. Berlin is a very segmented Jewish community. Most Jewish life happens inside the synagogues. There's an incredible thirst and a dearth sort of interesting and welcoming events that are happening. So we try to do a lot of those. We focus a lot on Jewish education and Jewish learning. We have a kollel, which is an intensive Jewish learning collective that learns like serious Jewish texts every Monday, all day, which is now, it's meeting online at the moment, but it had been in person. We do Shabbat events, we do Havdalah events, we do Jewish meditation. And in general, we're trying to activate and empower people to really bring Judaism into their own homes. So we have a project called Berlin Tish, where we try to get people to host in their own homes. Passover, we delivered 120 Passover packages to young people throughout the city because there are only 2 stores that sell Passover stuff. So we delivered matzah, maror, and charoset and haggadahs to people around the city. Yeah, that's a little bit about our work. I'll comment a little bit now on what it's like to be a Jew in Germany, now that you have this sort of overview of the community. I will say when I first moved here, I was nervous about walking around without a hat on. You know, I lived in Brooklyn and I walked around with a kippah all the time, and I was like a little nervous here. I'm sure many of you know, last Yom Kippur, my wife and I were in the synagogue that was attacked in Halle, Germany. I remember the day we got back to Berlin, or the day after, I was like, fuck it, I'm wearing this kippah. Like, the one place they say you're safe to wear your kippah, that's where they came for me. And there's like a big discussion in Germany, is it safe to wear a kippah on the streets? So I will say since then, I've mostly been wearing my kippah out. There are 4 types of reactions I get. And I'll sort of walk you through those reactions, and I think that'll give you a good sense of what it is. Occasionally, very rarely, I'll get a comment which is like clearly anti-Semitic. I think it's happened to me twice since October, which is like, to be honest, about the same rate that it happened to me in New York. Like it's not, if you wear a kippah all the time in New York, you're also gonna get comments that like are not, you know, not nice. So that's like the absolutely the rarest. The next sort of like rarest is like people will say things that are like, you know, a little anti-Semitic, but like not explicitly so. So like I'll be walking and someone will be like, hey man, like where in Israel are you from? Or I'll be walking down the street and be like, oh, my Jewish friend, you got any money or something like that. So it's like, you know, it's not like explicitly, I don't feel attacked, I don't feel, but it's like sort of nice, good old fashioned passive anti-Semitism. The next level you get, which is by far the most annoying, is people who see my kippah as an invitation for them to tell me all about their complicated history. Sometimes this is like, you know, my grandma told me on her deathbed that she was Jewish. Those are like somewhat welcoming. Then there are those people who sort of drift a little bit into the second group, but are mostly in the third group, where they're like, you know, I think I have Jewish in me. Like I look at my mother's nose and I'm like, there's no way she's not Jewish. And I just feel it. I feel it inside. Or they'll be like, you know, I have to tell you my grandfather was a Nazi and I'm so sorry. I remember one time I was at a bar with friends, and this is like somewhere between that second and third category. And someone walked up to us and they were like, you know, it's terrible, all the anti-Semitism. I think if you just explained to the neo-Nazis that Kafka was Jewish, they wouldn't hate you so much. And like this is by far the most annoying category. It happens quite frequently. It's people who I think mean well. I think their heart's in the right place, but they just don't know how to like react with it. I think the best example that we can think of is my grandmother, my mother's mother, who is a wonderful human who she just died last December. And she was a wonderful human being. And for her time growing up in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, was incredibly progressive. And like also like when Obama was elected was like, you know, these blacks, I just don't know. And like, you know, it's kind of like they're coming from a world that isn't used to seeing Jewish people on the street. And they're not reacting always very well to it. The fourth category, which is by far the most common, is they ignore it. They like see it and they like try not to look, you know? And that's most Germans. I think there's still an element in German society of like not wanting to necessarily, you know, not asking too many questions, like just sort of like looking straight ahead of you and seeing what happens. And that's easily the most popular reaction that I get. I will say that we, since the attack on Yom Kippur, anytime we have any public gathering in our home, meaning any gathering that's like on Facebook or anything like that, we will have plainclothes security officers outside. And we've never had a problem. And our German neighbors who live in sort of our courtyard, we live in a building with a courtyard and a bunch of buildings, they always, their reaction is like, you know, it's such a shame that this has to happen. And I think that's a lot of the ideology, which is it's such a shame that this has to happen, but there's not necessarily a lot of active response to that. So there's a collective idea that like, this is bad, we have a bad situation, there are things that we need to improve, but there seems to be some sort of paralysis in terms of what they can do about it. And one of their responses, and it's a very German response, is let's build huge memorials. Let's give lots of money. Like I will say after the attack in Halle, we got a big check from the German government. You know, like, sorry, you know, Rebecca and I joke it's our reparations money. And I'll tell another funny story, which I think really typifies German response to things, which is 2 days after the attack, I needed to take out money because we had a bunch of, all the group who was in the synagogue with us, they were coming over for dinner, and I needed to buy food for dinner, you know, whatever. And I went to our bank and we had hit our withdrawal limit on our bank for the week. And so I was like, okay, I'll just go inside and talk to them. You know, I'm a Borovitz. I can talk my way into anything, out of anything, whatever. So I go in and talk to the woman at the front desk, and I was like, I hit my limit. We really need this money. She's like, sorry, there's nothing I can do. And I was like, listen, I was in the attack in Halle like 2 days ago. It was like news in the US. In Germany, it was like front page news for weeks. I mean, it really was a major news event in Germany. And I was like, listen, everyone knew about it. I was like, I was in the attack. She's like, sorry, there's nothing we can do. And I was like, can I talk to the manager? And she's like, there's nothing he can do either. And I was like, all right, well, let me just talk to the manager. So the manager I'd met him when we opened our account, and he said, come on back. And we sat down. And I was like, listen, we hit this limit. He's like, yeah, there's nothing we can do. And the cashier didn't come in today, so we can't open up the cash box for you. I'm sorry. And I was like, listen, we were in this attack in Halle. Like, all these people are coming over. Is there any? He's like, there's nothing I can do. I was like, please, we had this terrible meeting. He's like, it's not my fault. And that's his attitude. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. Now, I was very angry when this happened, and I immediately tweeted at our bank, I just had this terrible experience, claiming it's not my fault, and I twisted his words a little bit because I was angry and a little bit emotional. And then I tagged also all the journalists who had interviewed me in the last 2 days. And so the bank wrote to me on Twitter and said, can you send us an email with exactly what happened? So I sent them an email, and then I forgot about it. 2 weeks later, we get a letter in the mail from our bank. And by the way, our bank had some Nazi ties back in the day. And I get a letter from our bank. Dear Mr. Borovitz, we are so sorry that you had to go through the attack in Halle. Please accept this €80 gift certificate to a restaurant of your choice. And this is the German response. It's like, we know we did something wrong, so we're gonna write you a check or build a memorial, because we don't want to ignore it. We don't want to pretend like it didn't happen, but we don't really have the capabilities to do the hard work of confronting what's actually going on. I think this is, in some ways, it's very different, I think, than memorialization happens in the US. I think in the US, it's sort of they don't even get to that memorial stage on the whole, while there are some people who really maybe do the hard work, but I don't know. But it's sort of teeter in between. Because they build the big memorial, it's sort of oh, well, now I'm not obligated to do the hard work. One last story, and then I'll open it up sort of to questions. And I'll leave it to Nylene as to how we want to do the question and answer portion, maybe in the chat. I don't know, or maybe just people one at a time. But there's a big synagogue called the Oranienburger Strasse Synagogue. It's actually the Masorti, or conservative synagogue in Berlin. And at one point it was called the New Synagogue. It was built in the 1870s, and it was this huge, massive structure, 3,000 person synagogue, full on the high holidays, probably empty the rest of the year, a real German Jewish synagogue. And it was destroyed on Kristallnacht. And in the early 2000s, they rebuilt the synagogue, but they only rebuilt the facade. So from the outside, it looks exactly like the synagogue used to look. And in fact, there are some buildings inside, there's some rooms inside, and it's where the Masorti community meets, and there's a museum, and there's an institute and stuff like that. But if you go to the back, where the giant main sanctuary used to be, it's just an empty space. It's just an empty space with the outline of the former hall. And that to me sort of typifies, I think, a lot of this German thing. We're going to show that we're doing the hard work, but on the inside, we're not really going to look at what's going on the inside. So yeah, that's a little bit of an overview. I'm happy to answer any questions you have about anything, including about my father. Any of the deep dirt, I'm happy to divulge that at this point, because he promised he would stay on mute. So this is your chance, people. So I'll open it up for questions.
Jeremy, I'm one of the people who just finished reading that book, Learning from the Germans. And this author, Susan Nyman, was very impressed with what the Germans have done. She kept using the term working off the past. And she was especially especially complimentary of what East Germany did before the unification. And there was a question of whether that was anti-Nazi, anti-fascism by decree, or whether the people really felt it. She was really big on the memorials and all these different signs that have been that show the symbols. But from what you discussed, you spoke about the four different reactions people have. But I still get the feeling that you're still the other. You know, it's always like, what do you think about the Jews? Do the Jewish people, can they feel that they're actually are they accepted as part of the society, or are they still the other? You're always just German Jews and not really Germans.
So it's a great question. Thank you, David. I'll say first, I think the Jew is always the other. I think you can disguise your otherness. I think you can even escape your otherness. But I think to be an open and proud Jew in society at large is to be the other. And this is like a part of my own ideology that I would be happy to go into, but maybe this is not the forum for that. But I think there is an otherness to us. And we're always going to be seen like that. I think in German society, there are Jews who certainly are really successful in German society, certainly in business, in real estate. Jews own a lot of real estate in Berlin, especially because post-World War II, real estate was really cheap in Berlin, and Jews had access to capital from like the Hebrew Free Loan Society and stuff like that. So being like using German guilt to be like, you have to give me this old Jewish land, like whatever. So like any of the old Berlin Jews have a lot of real estate. So they've certainly been successful in that sense. I will say there's a certain type of Jew that Germany likes, that Germany and like Germans like, which is the Jew who doesn't look too much like a Jew, who doesn't act too Jewish. Yeah, your religion is Judaism. That's totally fine. My religion is Protestantism. My religion is atheism. Whatever. But like, just don't act too Jewish. And I think if you're willing to play that kind of game with the Germans, then they're fine with you. Then it doesn't matter. They won't ask any questions. You can rise in society. You can do whatever you want. But where they get uncomfortable is if you're too in what they feel is in their face about your Judaism, because it brings up a lot of complicated emotions for a lot of people. They want to feel like, okay, we're past that. We moved on from that, especially in Berlin, which prides itself on being this like super multicultural city, which it is. It really, really is. But it's like, just don't get too Jewy about it. Just like I as a part of those four reactions, I will say at least once every other week, someone will go up to me, a clearly non-Jew, and say like, you can't wear your kippah out. You should be scared. Like them telling me that I should be scared to wear my kippah, which really is them talking about their own discomfort about the idea that they think I should be scared. Again, it's a complicated issue. There's like a lot of layers to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you for your question, David. I hope I vaguely answered it.
Jeremy?
I see Barbara raising her hand, so go ahead, Barbara.
Hi, Jeremy. Hi, it's good to see you. One of the other main themes, along with this working off the past, which was recurrent throughout, because it's a process, and that was what she was getting at. One of the other themes was shame and guilt. And this woman who wrote the book is a philosopher. That's her primary perspective, her lens through which she decided to write the book. In fact, because of what was happening in America, in fact, exactly when Trump was elected. And she was looking at the process of learning in America through what the Germans had experienced and had done during the Holocaust. This idea of shame and guilt, they're not the same. And you've talked about their guilt, their guilty conscience, and giving you the money to kind of placate you for the inconvenience or for perhaps what was unfair about, the bank situation. She said something about the guilt is what is imposed upon people, but that really what she experienced in Germany was that when they can arrive at shame, that's more of the external from the outside in to the German people, that's something that's more advanced in this process of understanding what the other means. So, even you used the word guilt and shame. Do you see that as a different orientation to what you're experiencing there? Do you see any difference there? That they refuse to feel the shame because there's the defeat. I mean, you're still, and yet we are in our country so much further backward, which is kind of a paradox, but we're so backward as contrasted with Germany. She thought that Germany was more along this road of acceptance of people. So, I mean, your experience in America, I mean, you're a white person. Whether you wear a yarmulke or not, you're a white person. What do you think about this shame versus guilt there? Do you see there being a distinction?
It's a fabulous question. Thank you, Barbara. I would expect nothing less. But I think, so in 1968, there were a group of students in West Germany. Until 1968, Germany, neither East Germany nor West Germany really. East Germany did like anti-fascist stuff, but in West Germany, there really was not a lot of Holocaust commemoration pre-1968. And in 1968, there was a group of people who are known in Germany as the 68ers, who were students, who were like, it's not enough to have guilt. It's not enough to send money to Israel. It's not enough to pay these survivors. We have to really feel shame. Like we have to like really change the way we like lived as a society. And it's when that group started coming into power, which is like the late 80s, early 90s, that you really started to see a lot of this memorialization happening. Well, the 68ers are now at the tail end of their power. They're in their 70s, and they're in power in a lot of places. Angela Merkel is certainly in this 68er group, although not exactly. I mean, she's from the East, so it's a little different, but she's certainly a contemporary of them. And I think what you're seeing in the generation after them, certainly people who are my peers and even younger, is this idea of, why should I feel shame? Guilt, okay, I get, maybe guilt is a part of a responsibility of the past, but shame is for something you did. I didn't do anything. Not only did I not do anything, for a lot of people like their 20s today, my grandparents didn't even do anything. People who did something, I never even knew them. So why should I feel shame? And I think that's a part of what's happening now. And a part of the reason for that, I think, is that the memorialization, the uber memorialization sort of felt people like, okay, I've done my kapara, I've done my duty, and so we don't need to do anymore. It can stop there. I don't think that the younger generation here feels shame at all. I don't think it exists. Maybe some of them still feel guilt, but I don't think shame is really a big part of it. I think it's interesting to compare it to the US because there's a lot of people in the US South who are still, and certainly 50, 60 years ago, there were a lot more in the US South who were sort of lamenting the fall of the Confederacy. I don't think you have such a lamenting of the fall of the Nazi regime here. I think what you have more of here is like, man, but did they have to punish us so much? Like, do we still have to be responsible? And that's that feeling that I think continues to linger.
Can I say something?
Please.
Alice? What I'm thinking about while everyone's talking is that if I was a German feeling shame and guilt, I would feel resentment towards the people that make me feel shame and guilt, the Jews. And it's not, I don't see it as a positive thing. And I like to also say, I think it's very courageous to live there. If they gave me a life and I was a young woman, life free, food, clothing, money to spend, it would be the last place in the world I would live in. So I think it's very courageous of you. But the shame and guilt, I think is anti-Jewish, because people will resent that the Jews make them feel shame and guilt and more of the other. That's what I think.
Jeremy, before you answer, people are off mute and we can hear you moving around. So please, unless you're asking a question, mute yourself.
Thank you, Nylene. I think that's right, and I think that's why I get a lot of the reactions I get with my kippah. It's like, stop making me feel like this by simply existing and being yourself. So yeah, it's I think it's not so dissimilar from how some men in the incel community feel about women, especially women who won't sleep with them. It's like the incel community is like a community of men white men online who are like mad at women for not sleeping with them, as if the women owe them something. I think it's like, how dare you be a woman and walk by me and not sleep with me? I think it's a similar idea here. It's like, how dare you be an open Jew and make me feel these things that I'm feeling right now? So yeah.
Rabbi, Jeremy, Naomi Cohn, tell us about the kids, children. Are they being educated in Jewish day schools, or what kind of education are they getting?
Yeah, so there are 3 Jewish elementary schools in Berlin, 3 Jewish schools in Berlin, and there's about 6 or 7 Jewish daycares. Jewish education is all paid for by the state, so its affordability is not an issue. There are there's like a private school also that is like an American school that is also heavily Jewish, because like rich people want to send their kids to the American school, so they, America still has some prestige left. So people still want their kids to go to American universities. But yeah, there's definitely Jewish education. I don't know how part of the problem is that the education either tends to be very orthodox or not very good from the Jewish perspective. So it's a problem that I'm sorry, there are 4 schools. I forgot. There's a 4th school that just opened. But so it's something we're struggling with, especially as we think about our time here. Our daughter's in a Jewish daycare now. It's quite lovely. And like, we have some decisions to make depending on how long we're here.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
Can we get back to that guilt / shame discussion you had?
I always love getting back to guilt, so.
Nicely. Because, I mean, I feel shame for lots of things that this country has done, including things that we're doing now. But I don't necessarily feel any personal guilt about it because, it didn't affect me, or I had no, part in it. But it seems to me that guilt is more personal and shame is more communal.
Yeah, I think that's right. And they feel guilt because it hurts them personally, but they don't feel responsible. Shame, I think, is like, man, it's like, I'm seeing this happen and it's terrible, but it's like they're not living through it. I think we feel guilt about the past and we feel shame about the present, I think, is maybe also a part of what's going on there. I don't want to name any names, but maybe there are certain world leaders who like put children in cages. I don't know. And that was for you, Dad. But like, that may make us feel shameful. But the guilt is deeper. It is personal. It's much more personal. And don't forget, a lot of people have complicated stories, especially if you're living here and if your family's been here for many generations. And it's like, where were their grandparents? Where were their great-grandparents? And it's like, to what extent am I responsible for that? I think it's a really tough question because, like, I don't know what my great-grandparents did. I never knew any of my great-grandparents. When at my grandma's Shiva in December, one of her cousins came and she's like, oh yeah, it's like the cousin who blew up the hotel. And I was like, what? It turns out in the 30s, we had some anarchist cousin who blew up a hotel. He only killed himself, but like, it's like a crazy story. And it's like, how am I even supposed to feel about that? I don't even know. And like, had he killed people, would I have felt any differently?
Hi, Jeremy. And this is Linda Gould. First of all, I have my earliest memory of you is when you were a toddler running down towards the beamer where your father was conducting the service, and you were so excited to see him. It was a wonderful sight. But my question is about immigration, about other people that came to Germany, an influx of thousands of people that came. Whatever happened to them? Were they supported by the government? Were they integrated into society? So if you could just cover a little bit about that, I'd be.
Sure. So Germany took in about 1 million, actually, Syrian mostly Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Germany does an incredibly good job at offering language class, at offering job training. And like, this is actually a very German thing. If you're willing to become German, we don't care where you come from. So like, as long as you're willing to like adopt German culture, it's like when I told that story about the bank before, the woman who was at the front, she was a Turkish woman. Like she was wearing a head covering, and she was clearly a Turkish woman, but she was so German. She was just like, in her interactions, she was so German, like, well, there's nothing we can do. I actually, in the days after the attack, people in our neighborhood who went up to us and said something to us were overwhelmingly like older Turkish people or Syrian immigrants, like recent Syrian immigrants, because like they have like, to be German is not to say something to a certain extent. And you can integrate into German society to an extent. There is definitely a racism in German society towards a lot of these Muslim immigrants, mostly Muslim immigrants, especially in the East. Like racism is a lot higher in the East, partially because for like lots of reasons that are connected to both education, as well as a lot of these immigrants were resettled in the East because that's where there was room, because you want to move to West Germany because it's wealthier and there are better jobs there. But generally, I think Germany has done a decent job. That being said, there's still a lot of room to grow. I think there's definitely some issues with anti-Semitism from some of those communities, mostly rooted in anti-Israel stuff. However, I will say most of the anti-Israel stuff comes from the Turkish community, and especially like the Turkish community that hasn't integrated. Like there's also a huge Kurdish community here. We actually there's a vegan Kurdish restaurant around the corner from us that we recently made the first kosher restaurant in the neighborhood. And he's so excited. And he put a big Star of David out front of his restaurant. But he's kind of a crazy human being. But from the Kurdish community and from the Syrian community, I don't see the anti-Israel sentiment as much. But from the Kurdish community, from the Turkish community, there is more of that. But you know,
they were given jobs and schooling and housing.
They are given housing, they are given schooling. The state absolutely takes care of them. No one goes hungry in Germany. And I'll also say, with everything that just happened, like anyone who was economically affected by coronavirus and all of this stuff, they just got a 5,000 euro check. You just have to go to the bank and be like, this is why, and like attest to it. And the state just sent you 5,000 euro. It's a very German approach. They're like, yeah, we'll just give you an apartment. We'll just give you like, there is a very strong social safety net here. At the same time, if you're trying to get rich, it's not an easy country to do it. There's like high taxes. There's lots of impediments to that. So it's obviously a double-edged sword in that sense. But there's definitely a strong immigrant safety net. I'm also like very far from an expert in this issue. So this is just my sort of bird's eye view of that.
Jared, Joan Tab here.
Yeah, hi.
I was wondering, how is the Holocaust treated in German schools for German children? Yeah,
it's a great question. There is a very intensive Holocaust education component, for sure. It's not. I mean, There's like mandatory Holocaust learning. Many schools will have to go visit a synagogue. That being said, there is anti-Semitism in schools, which is why many Jewish kids who are openly Jewish will go to the Jewish schools, because otherwise they'll really experience, kids are mean. Like, I don't know, kids can be cruel. And there's definitely anti-Semitism in German schools, and there's a big Holocaust education. Part of the problem in a place like Berlin is in Berlin, when you have a school that's like half or more immigrant, like mostly Turkish or Syrian or Sudanese or from different parts of the world, they're like, well, okay, Holocaust education, but that wasn't my ancestors. My parents came here in the 60s or in the 90s, or like, what? This has nothing to do with me. And it's even like another level, this resentment that is growing from kids in those communities. So it's like, you're forcing me to learn about this thing that I feel like I have nothing to do with. And I even remember when I was in school and we would learn about slavery, and there was sort of this narrative in my Jewish day school, like, yeah, but like all of our families came here after that. So it's like, it's good to learn about it, but it's not really our problem. Which was a bad attitude, I think, for us to have then. And I think that same bad attitude is being engendered in German schools.
So Phyllis again, so if the kids are feeling resentment, then why do they have to learn this right now? They don't want to hear about it. Doesn't that mean that they start resenting Jews again?
Yeah, sometimes, but like, what else are you gonna do? Not teach them about the Holocaust? Like, I don't know that I think it's a complicated situation. It's complicated.
Jeremy?
Yes.
Nancy Heaps.
Hi,
Hi, I have a couple of questions actually. One about the Turkish thoughts about Jews. I'm just a little surprised because I know at one point, I know things have changed there a lot, that Turkey was the biggest vacation place for Israelis. So it's somewhat upsetting to hear about that. But my question is, number one, is there a pro-Nazi is there any obvious pro-Nazi feeling or movement in your country? And my other question is, for the coronavirus situation, what's it like in Germany at present?
Okay, so I'll briefly mention the Turkish thing. A lot changed with the Turkish-Israel relations with the
change of government.
Flotilla,
Yeah.
Which I don't know, that was 9 years ago, 8 years, I don't remember exactly. But yeah, so, and a lot of these people watch Turkish news, and the Turkish like state news changed in its coverage at that point. I don't have to tell you that there are like people who watch one news station and they believe everything that news station says. So that was also for you, Dad. There is a right-wing party called the AfD, or the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD as it's called here. They wouldn't call themselves a neo-Nazi party, partially because that would be illegal in Germany. They are basically a neo-Nazi party. That being said, there is a group of Jews who support the AfD, believe it or not. And their rhetoric is mostly, they don't really have anti-Jewish rhetoric. They have because you can't do that in Germany. They have a lot of anti-Muslim rhetoric, a lot of immigrant rhetoric, a lot of anti-Holocaust remembrance rhetoric. Jews are fine, but can we give up this whole Holocaust thing? So there is this party. They were on the rise for a period. Their numbers have started shrinking. I think in the last major elections, they got about 9 or 10%. Which might seem like a lot, but it also means in the German structure, they're so far from having any power or any real voice. So it does exist. It seems like maybe it's going down, but it's there. It's an underbelly of society, and Germans really struggle with it right now. I will say in terms of coronavirus, Germany has generally, I feel, done a very good job. There's lots of reasons for that. Partially is the healthcare system is really good here for basic level stuff. I mean, it's really good in general. It's a really good healthcare system. There's this hospital around the corner from us that everyone's like, don't go to that hospital. It's a terrible hospital. Like, it's like, if something happens to you, go to this hospital, that hospital. And even this shitty hospital around the corner from us had like 70 ventilators when coronavirus broke out. So it's just like the level of preparation for hospitals for something like this was very high. And while Germany has certainly had a lot of cases, they've kept deaths very low. In Berlin, I think less than 200 people have died from coronavirus. And this is a city of 4 million people. And a lot, like, people took social distancing very seriously at first. The streets were empty. And now things are starting to be relaxed to the extent that actually synagogues are open this week, with very serious guidelines in place about the number of people who can come and where they can sit, and protocol and different stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another question, is the Jewish population in Germany, is it more Orthodox or more Reform melding into society?
About that.
So I would say it's interesting. It's most, there are like two powerhouses in Germany. There's like the Orthodox and the liberal. There's almost nothing in between. I'll also say Berlin is home to 3 rabbinical schools. There's an Orthodox rabbinical seminary only for men that's like affiliated with Lakewood. So it's like a very yeshivish sort of environment. There's also a Chabad yeshiva in Hamburg. In addition, Germany has a liberal rabbinical school called the Abraham Geiger College, which has some affiliations with the Reform movement in the United States. I will say the man who's in charge of liberal Judaism in Germany, he and I don't get along for lots of reasons that I'd be happy to talk about, not on a recorded call. But there's also a very small Masorti rabbinical school. But it's there's like 4 or 5 students, and it's really affiliated with the liberal one. Masorti Judaism or conservative Judaism is very, very tiny here. You mostly have liberal, which is like traditional German liberal, which does not even necessarily mean egalitarian. There are liberal synagogues where they're playing the organ and they have a choir and all this stuff, but like men and women sit separately and only men can run parts of the service. It's a liberal Judaism that's like being preserved from 1945. Then you have like an Orthodox, which is like also not particularly inventive. When it comes to ritual stuff, they're mostly stuck in 1945. Whereas like whoever came back in 1945, they set the traditions and we have to preserve them. There's really a preservationist Judaism that exists in the synagogues. And again, I would say most, in terms of like rabbis or synagogues, it's probably maybe 60-40 liberal to Orthodox, with like there's literally just one conservative rabbi in the whole country. I guess 2 if you count her husband. So like, yeah, so that's basically the general split. But like everywhere else in the world, most Jews are unaffiliated. And you also have some places which are called an Einheitsgemeinde. So like the community switches based on who the rabbi is. So if the rabbi's liberal, they'll be liberal. If the rabbi's Orthodox, they'll be Orthodox. And they sort of go back and forth depending on the winds of time.
Thank you so much.
Any other questions? Barbara?
Yeah, Jeremy, you had talked about doing the hard work. You mentioned that twice, doing the hard work, as opposed to perhaps paying lip service, giving money. But then we talked about government, then we talked about leadership. And again, we're trying to sort of juxtapose your experience in Germany now as a Jewish man who has put great effort into doing the hard work. You are embodying doing the hard work for a different sphere of people, different influences, but you are doing the hard work there. What's happening here compared to there is something that I'd be curious if you could, in your American Jewish sense, white Jewish sense, sort of contrast or compare your your identity as a Jew in Germany, what we're trying to do here is look at least the book did. She's a philosopher. And as far as, I just wanted to clarify one thing, as far as shame and guilt, I'm a Jewish mother, but I'm not a Jewish mother. I'm not trying to force feed anybody guilt or shame. But the perspective was that philosophically, the dignity of a human being, regardless of their color, whatever color they are, whatever religion they are, this is the goal of our humanity, according to her. Now, I'm not an anthropologist, but according to her, this is the kind of life that we should value, that we give dignity to all people and freedom to all people, regardless of where you live, regardless of what you are. So what I'm questioning here is the idea of doing the hard work that you're doing there. Look at it from the perspective of the hard work that the leadership in Germany is doing and the government is doing in trying to work us through that goal. It's a process. It's a process. That's why working off the past can be taken a few different ways. But it's always a present tense verb. You're always working off the past and making it the present. And look at what we're doing here in this country, or not, in terms of leadership, in terms of racism. It just is a very important, it's a focal point. It's a focal point. So you use the term doing the hard work, do the hard work, do the hard. That's why I think we're all very impressed with what you're doing. You're doing the hard work. You're living through this. It's not lip service. You're trying to resurrect something and grow something for the future, so, for freedom, for people. Now, we haven't talked about the word assimilation. We haven't talked about the word acculturation. These are very big words. So can you maybe take any little point here and expand on it from your position and your place in your part of the world?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I think one thing I'll say is that something that exists in the US, which does not exist here, which is a positive about here, is that in the US, a lot of these issues about whiteness and gender and all this stuff has become very politicized. So it's like, if you feel a certain way about something, it means that you must be affiliated with one party or another. I don't think that's necessarily true here. I think in general, other than the AfD, pretty much all German political parties are like, at least on the surface, are saying like, we have to remember the past, we have to do outreach to minority community, yada, yada, yada. Like, you just don't have that same political element of it. I think what you lose then is you lose people calling you out. So like, when you're doing something that's paying the lip service, but doesn't actually get to the core of the issue, there's no one to call you out. In America, there's lots of people to call you out, but none of them are listening to each other. So it doesn't really matter. You don't have that same problem here. There is a dialogue that goes on about this, but I'll give you another example. We were like invited to the German parliament for this like Auschwitz commemoration, and Ruvi Rivlin, the president of Israel, was speaking. And we were like, oh, great, that sounds cool. We'll go to the German parliament. Like, we've never been. And we like show up, and like someone comes up and is like, oh, Mr. Borovitz, Mrs. Blade, like Rabbi Borovitz, Rabbi Blady, like, here are your VIP passes, and here's your handler for the day. And we're like, what? And then they like bring us around. They sit us in the first row of the VIP gallery, and we're like, what is going on? And then like the Speaker of the Parliament during his speech like names us by name and points to us, and everyone looks at us, and then we're on TV. And it's like, they're like, but like they never talked to us. Like, no one ever asked us if that was okay. No one ever like sat down with us and said like, how do you feel about the fact that you survived this terrorist attack? Yada, yada, yada. What they wanted to do is point us out in the gallery. And again, it's good that these things aren't political. It's definitely good. It's definitely good that there's like a general consensus that that was a good thing to do. But the harder work would have been for them to say like, wow, tell me a little bit about your experience of being a Jew in Germany. Of being a Jew in this country. Right. How do you feel about it? I will say there's definitely like a strand in like the German media who really wants to tell this story. We have like a couple friends who are journalists who are Germans, who are like constantly pushing the German society on this issue. Like a lot of these things I'm saying are not my words. They're coming from this segment of German society that really sees this as a problem. And so there are people constantly writing articles being like, you can't just point to a Jew in the audience and that makes everything okay. Like you have to actually be in
Token
dialogue.
Jew. The token Jew. Hi, this is Linda again. I just want to check, how would you describe the present relationship between Germany and the United States? Do you have any opinion, or do you?
I have no opinion when it comes to US politics at this juncture. So I will.
The relationship of Germany and the US.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. The US is a little bit here at this point. I don't like, Germans like, whoa, you're from, I'll also say I walk around here and like people are like, oh, you're from New York. Like, are you okay? Like, is your family okay? Like New York is being portrayed in the international media like a war zone. And so like, and again, I don't know. I'm just like, I think there's a part of it that like Germans like feeling like they're better than America. So there's definitely like a thing going on there. But yeah.
In fact, I read an article recently by a journalist from Ireland. His name is O'Toole, and he said that many countries are pitying the United States now. They always felt that the U.S. was so strong and it was a leader, and here they botched up so many things about this pandemic that they feel sorry for our country.
Linda, I would think that is another hour's worth of conversation.
Right.
And just an even more depressing one. Does anyone have any further questions? I just have one more for Jeremy, if no one else does.
This is Jeff Baker, and Jeremy, always good to catch up with you. And I'm sure that you do have an opinion on the U.S. Politics, but I'm sure you just don't want to talk about it. I'm done.
Jeremy, thank you. This was wonderful. And it was great to hear you and see you. I think in listening to you, many of us are thrown back to listening to your dad. Your speech patterns and hand patterns are so similar. But I have one more question, which you may want to decline to answer, especially since your father's on the call, which is, have you thought about longer term plans? Are you planning to stay there? Are you planning to come home? Is there anything you want to share with us?
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question.
It's okay. You don't have to answer.
No, listen, it's hard because and I'm not just saying this because my dad's on the line. I love my parents and I love my family, and I miss them a lot. And I don't miss living in New York. We really love our life here. We love the work. We love what we do. We love being a part of this community. And I do feel safe and protected by this country. And so like all of those are positives, and like my parents live in New York and I want my daughter to know her grandparents. And like, that's really important to me. And I'm saying that as my way of saying that I like don't have an answer. But I appreciate the question. I also want to say that I appreciate very much, I get requests to do these things, but this was a special one. And I normally say no, but I couldn't say no to this one. And I want to say that like a lot of people I talk to have really traumatic childhood experiences of their Judaism. And I don't have that. And I want to say that's a big thanks to a lot of the people on this call. Like our shul, our temple was like a family, and it was a wonderful family. And I all of you were a big part of me growing up, and you gave me like lots of positive Jewish experiences. And I just hope that the temple continues to be such a warm and loving and family-oriented place. And I will say that as we think of the community that we want to build, I'm often drawing on examples from the community that exists at Temple Avodat Shalom. Still just Avodat Shalom, right? Yeah, okay. I have really like fond memories, and I'll just share one briefly because I know that Ruth B. Hiller died recently.
Yes.
I had heard, and I just had a memory of like when I heard that she passed. Like every year, she would like on Rosh Hashanah, she always sat right in front of us, and like she would always turn to me and show me where we were in the prayer book. She would like point to the page and be like, like let's go. But she did it with such a smile and such a loving face that like, how could you be mad at Ruth B. Hiller? Like she was just like a happy human being. And like that's a beautiful memory. It's a way of like sort of instilling the things that are important, but doing it with love and doing it with a smile. And I think that's something that we really try to mimic in our work. So thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure. And we all owe my father a round of applause because he kept himself on mute. And we know how hard that is for him. So like a big round of applause to Rabbi Neil.
Thank you so much. Our Tuesday group is thinking about a new project starting next week. If anyone has suggestions and wants to join us, let us know. Jeremy, stay well, stay healthy, and to everyone, see you at the next Zoom. Bye.
Jeremy, thank you.